the Director of Education for the Providence Children's Museum. And we're thrilled that you're joining us. This is the first lecture that we're cutting our teeth on, and we hope to have a series of virtual lectures for families and caregivers of young children. And we're thrilled that we have Ryan here tonight to join us. So we are joined by Ryan Loiselle. Ryan is the Program Director for FriendsWe, Rhode Island's only bereavement center. This bereavement center supports children ages 3 to 18 and their families. Ryan has a master's in social work from Simmons College in Boston and did his undergraduate at the University of Rhode Island in Human Development and Studies with a minor in thanatology. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. The study of death, loss, grief, and bereavement. And we invited Ryan to share with us tonight because we anticipated that many of the families at home are dealing with issues of loss due to the coronavirus pandemic. We hope that this webinar would provide some insight into supporting a grieving child, what to expect from a grieving child, how to notice the signs, if you will, and how to use play as an opportunity to support your child during their period of grief. We hope that this is relevant and helps to put some new tools and some new information into your toolbox. I'd like to turn this over to Ryan and have him start off by sharing a little bit about FriendsWe and its important role for families in Rhode Island and in Southern New England.
Great, thank you, Kristin. So I'm thrilled to be here, certainly to kick off your webinar tour. So as Kristin said, my name is Ryan and I'm from FriendsWe, Rhode Island's only children's bereavement center, serving children and teens and after a significant death has happened. So first off, we are a totally free service. We're located in Warwick and have been doing our groups for about 20 years. I'm the only full-time employee. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, though our services are not therapy. So our volunteers, and I know a few volunteers are on the webinar tonight, our volunteers are the ones facilitating our peer groups. They've gone through training to learn how to work with children and teens, working on communication skills, expressive arts, play, dynamics, and everything. And in a program year from September to June, we serve about 140 families. And, you know, in keeping our services free is important, so we rely on grants, fundraisers, and donations to keep our services afloat. And we are fortunate to be affiliated with Gateway Healthcare as well as being a lifespan partner.
Terrific, terrific. And what are some of the ways that families find FriendsWe? What are some of the strategies that families can be pointed in your direction?
Sure. Families are welcome to call us on their own. A lot of families hear about us through word of mouth, through Google, if you're just researching children's grief. Most of our referrals do come from schools. So school social workers, school nurses, teachers. We get a lot of referrals from pediatricians' offices, hospitals, hospice, private therapists, funeral home directors typically end up knowing about us. So really anywhere. And because we've been around for 20 years, sometimes when I answer the phone, a family may say, well, I've heard of you from 5 different places, but the most recent one, you know, is this, or I've been meaning to call and I finally got around to reaching out today.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. And I can see with that number of families that how important those volunteers are as well. So I'm sure that they are either part of families that stay on or find their ways to you as well. So could you share with us what some of the reasons for why parents are seeking your support and children?
Most often the parent or guardian on the other end of the phone will say, I don't know how my kid is doing. They're not talking. They won't share about the person who died. I don't know if they're okay. So they say, you know, they don't know of anybody else. Maybe they've tried the therapy route. Works great for most or for some, but obviously it's a very individualized process. So our whole reason for being is to have other kids and other teens as well as adults be around their peers who have also experienced the death of somebody close. So putting 6 to 8 preschoolers together, they get to know that they're not the only ones, because grief is really, really isolating. So for them to understand that you like blue, you like pizza, and your dad died, that's okay. And oh my gosh, I'm like you in some ways. And they realize that it's not anything awful that's going to follow you, and you're never going to amount to anything because your dad died. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying, many of our volunteers, about 13 of the 65, received services from us years ago and have now been in a position to give back, so that they can say, I sat in your chair. My mom died when I was 7, and now I'm 25. And they'll look and they will idolize this volunteer to be like, I want to be like you one day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How powerful that social referencing, knowing that you aren't somehow totally different, or that you will stay feeling that way. Yeah. Wonderful. And when a child is experiencing grief or loss, you talked a little bit about some of the sort of indicators. Are there other things that parents sort of should be looking for?
Absolutely. So yeah, this is not going to be the only checklist. I'm going to rattle off a few things.
Sure.
But they can be equated to children, teens, and adults. So again, grief is going to look very different for us as adults, because we're going to assume that the grief is going to look the same in our children, and it's not. So how grief is going to manifest in your body, you've got a headache. It might mean that you're hungry, it might mean that you're tired, or it might mean that your feelings are so big that they're just escaping to your head, and you've got to figure out how to get them out. So a lot of the kids are going to have, either all one way or all the other. They may have increased irritability, or you might have a kid that has no ambition. They're not paying attention. They're not involved in things that they used to be. Certainly talking about eating and sleeping habits, oftentimes when we are sad and depressed, we may eat more, we may sleep more. So those things are going to translate into the kids' lives as well. Their tolerance for screen time, for learning, for school, or things that wouldn't normally, really set them off, all of a sudden are. And in grief, your whole assumptive world has been shattered. What you thought was going to happen. I thought I was going to have my mom and dad forever and ever and ever. And now dad dies. Well, the sky could fall in tomorrow. Like, what else could happen? So It's the role of the parent and guardian to provide structure, rules, and safe spaces for these kids to explore their grief. And a lot of it happens through play.
Yeah. And I would imagine you spoke about how the adult and the child are sort of interpreting, the situation, the stimulus around them so differently. What are some things that you talk about when you think about a parent struggling to care for themselves at the same time as caring for kids?
So a really important thing for parents and guardians. So again, we're working with families that are having the grandparents now raise the children. So having the adults in their lives be aware that kids are sponges. And we know that, but even to reinforce that, to say kids may not always look like they're paying attention, or you think they are and they're not, or you want them to be and they're not, but then they pick up on the thing that they're like, you listen to that?
Yeah.
They're paying attention to verbal cues, nonverbal cues, your expression of happiness, of sadness, of anger. And adults are modeling the behavior, whether or not we know this, we're modeling the behavior that we want children to know is okay. So anger is okay if you're expressing it safely, if you're not hurting somebody, but you can be mad, you can storm out, you can throw a pillow. So again, for the adults to know that their body language and their coping style is going to affect how the children are going to learn how to express themselves.
Sure.
There are many times where an adult may say, my 3-year-old, my 5-year-old doesn't seem sad. They don't seem affected by the loss. They're not crying. And I'll validate them and then say, so have you cried in front of your child? And they may say, well, I don't want to cry in front of them because I don't want to make them upset.
Yeah.
So again, it's okay for an adult to cry in front of their child, to cry with their child, but then reassure them that I'm crying today. I'm really missing your mom. And it was just Mother's Day. And I really wish we could have, had breakfast together. So that's why I'm sad. And then that gives that child permission to know that, oh, so you're an adult and you get sad. And when you're sad, you cry, and that's okay.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, we know with young kids, right? We're teaching them about emotions and naming their emotions and trying to name how they're feeling and put words instead of, acting out, and how important that role is in teaching someone how to express grief, or how to share how you coped in that moment. I felt sad. I did this thing. I listened to music. It made me happy. Those types of, yeah. I'm also reminded, Ryan, of back when we used to be able to fly on airplanes more regularly, the rule of really, putting your oxygen mask on first before you care for your child. I don't know if that's something you could speak to as well about self-care. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you and I, Kristin, I mean, we are those people that need to be doing all adults, all people, all ages need to be doing self-care. Because like you said, if you're not good enough to take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to help somebody else.
Yeah.
So that's a big component to our services at FriendsWe, where our kids, teens are meeting downstairs in our building, and our adult caregiver group gets to meet with their own grieving peers who are raising children who are grieving, to then talk about, how do I find time for myself? How do I take a shower? How do I connect with other people? How do I pay attention to my own needs when I've got my children? And, it's figuring out how to, fill your bucket, to, see what you're going to need to do to be the best parent, guardian, friend, whoever it is to these children. And, we would all love to have a massage every day and a vacation every week. And, those probably are unrealistic, but sometimes self-care is misconstrued to this overindulgence, like, well, I can't afford that and I can't do this. You can do many things without having to spend money. You can just put on some music, light a candle, take a walk around the block, clear your head, leave your phone somewhere, just limit screen time, limit different things that are distractions and are going to take you away from being your best self. And recognize when you need to take a break, or you need to take a nap, or you can't, be on your computer or answer that email. Because again, your kids, if they see you not taking a break and not doing things for yourself, they're going to learn that you've got to just be busy all the time and not take time for yourself.
Sure. Yeah. And that that peer network, whether it's kids with kids or adults with adults, the same holds true. You know, there are folks who are, I would imagine, further along age-wise and have new coping strategies, or adults who have lived longer with this loss and are able to support each other. Well, I thought we might talk a little bit about play as a strategy. We both use play in different ways. And I thought, sort of before we kind of got into that, I was thinking about the young children that we see, and my comment about, you know, being able to articulate how you're feeling or your emotions. With very young children who are still sort of even grasping the idea that people think differently than they do, or that there is the, you know, this idea that people, you know, how does someone's mind work that is different from mine? But are there particular things for, let's say, kids under 5, like 3 to 5, that are specific to grief and loss, and kids processing grief? I'm sure this is a segue right into the next piece, but I wondered if there was something sort of unique about that younger age group that you talk to parents about.
Sure. So I'm always coming to the conversation to say, and I didn't coin this, so I can't take full credit or any, but if you're old enough to love, then you're old enough to grieve. So there are so many parents, adults, guardians will reach out and say, he's 4. I don't think it's affected him. I don't think we need services. You know, I don't think he knows what's going on. And that's, I mean, incorrect. Again, it's an adult assuming based on the child's presentation, they're not seeming affected by it, that they're not grieving. But they're grieving in a way that's different. And kids' brains developmentally at that age, at that 3 to 5, they don't understand finality. They don't understand permanence. Mm-hmm. And when I do all of my volunteer trainings or trainings in the schools and really talk about specific age groups, and to say, you know, you're going to have to explain that your person died like 1 million times, because they're going to maybe grasp it right now, like, okay, daddy died. 10 minutes later, when is daddy going to be done being dead? Mm. And, you know, they see it in cartoons, in video games, that somebody dies, he's got another life. So having to compassionately and sensitively just explain this kind of over and over again. So they're going to, you know, we're going to talk about play, but they're going to perform what they understand. Mm. They're going to reenact something that they've seen, something that they've heard. And, you know, in the grief world, we call it death play. Mm. They may reenact the funeral, and a parent or guardian may call me alarmed to say, something's wrong with my kid. He's got his sister pretending that she's dead, and somebody else, you know, walking up to a casket and saying, I love you. Mm. And I will say, that's great. Mm-hmm. Because maybe they had gone to the funeral and seen this happen, and then they're reenacting it.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to ask you, Kristin, tell me about a movie you saw, you'd probably verbally tell me what happened in this scene and everything. A child typically is going to engage in play and reenact the surprise party or reenact mm-hmm. another piece of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yes, well, I do see where the repetition is so necessary, and it's just sort of these dawning sort of layers of understanding and realization, and children's sense of time. You know, they sort of history is as old as the grandparent in their house. And so, yeah. Well, would you, I mean, we've been teasing everybody with it, but if you could share with folks how FriendsWe really uses play as a strategy for coping and memory building, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Sure. And would invite, once we can, safely, to explore our building. We love showing it off. It is bright and colorful, and toys and, you know, different size chairs for different size people. So we engage in play more so in our youngest age group, in our preschool, like 3 to 5, 3 to 6-year-olds. Because they're not going to be able to banter back and forth for an hour and a half, with a half hour for dinner and then about an hour or so for our peer group. So all groups start out, we say our name, who died, how we're feeling. We'll use a lot of feelings dolls downstairs with different faces. And some kids in the beginning will grab 2 dolls and say, I'm feeling happy that my mom is living, but I feel sad that my dad died. And again, even right there, kids are showing that you can feel more than one emotion at one time. Mm-hmm. So we're learning from these kids, and then the kids follow suit, and then they'll do their own thing. So we'll do our intros. We're playing with Play-Doh. I'm playing right now with the fidget cube that we made, and they'll say how they've been doing. Then we'll get into, if we're talking about feelings, maybe we're playing with Play-Doh to have the kids, you know, mold Play-Doh if you were really angry, and you'll see how their play is going to be, you know, harder and rougher and, you know, just meaner. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, play with something different. And then naturally the kids, you know, kind of go off in little corners and might reenact a puppet show. They might do dress up, and I've been the patient more often than I care to, you know, be all the time. But kids are playing out like, I went to the doctor and I got shots, and I don't like getting shots. And my daddy was really sick, and maybe he didn't get shots. So they're teasing this out through play. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the volunteers and myself are there to help create that safe space and keep them in that space, and pose questions as they come up while they're engaging in things, or to try to, you know, connect the dots to say, so you said your dad died due to cancer. Did you know, I think Joey just said his mom died due to cancer. Mm-hmm. And then they make that combination, and then they'll say, all right, I like blue. And then they're off to something else. And we're drawing on the chalkboard, and we're doing body drawings to show mm-hmm. where in our bodies we feel different feelings. Mm-hmm. Our kids groups, our youngest group, is really all over the place, as it should be.
Right.
We're playing in sand. Sometimes they might create the cemetery. Mm-hmm. They might put the gravestone. They might put flowers. They might put people, you know, going. And then we then might ask, so have you been to the cemetery? Do you like to go? Mm-hmm. Well, I like to go, but my mom cries when we go. Yeah. So again, they're aware. And then you say, so what's it like to see your mom cry? And then, you know, do you ever cry? And then, so it happens so organic. We'll think a group is going to go a certain way.
Yeah.
And then we're like, they spent an hour at the puppet show. That's awesome. And the kids will set up like stadium style seating, and they'll have other stuffed animals there, and the other kids will watch, and then we'll have mm-hmm. commercial breaks, and mm-hmm. it's really fun to see. And this is why a lot of people, even before becoming a volunteer, they might think, oh, children's grief, like how do you, it's going to be so sad. And yes, the reason is sad, but it's not always a sad place to be.
Sure. And I'm imagining, you know, this idea of inviting the adults and the caregivers in the room to join in the play, right? When you get to be the patient, or you get to be an audience member, they want you to be there. They want you to sort of see it unfolding, some of these types of things. And I know we've spent a lot of time thinking about young kids, but play and sort of creative expression are 2 parts of the same coin. What are some strategies that you use with the older kids through to the teenagers?
So as the kids get older, some like to bond over music. So we might have our kids painting to a different music playlist. And it might not be music that they particularly, is not their jam, but listening to something classical and then paint. So seeing how your psyche is going to paint listening to that. And then it's changed up to rock. And then it's, heavy metal. And then it's, reggae. And so again, just knowing that we're influenced by our external forces. And then you'll have these kids say, you know what? That's the song that reminds me of my mom. And then someone else, again, I was a volunteer at FriendsWe for a long time. And the best groups are really when you're not needing to do so much.
Right.
The group just takes off on its own because another kid will say, I like to listen to that song, but then it makes me sad. And then we'll get into another topic to say, okay, so what songs are your go-to kind of pull you out of a really dark mood?
Yeah.
We'll do a lot of journaling or, making collages and making a collage about coping or memories or, these are the types of things I want to do for the summer. Sometimes kids get compared to the person who died. And for sometimes it can be a positive thing and other times maybe not so good for the child. So sometimes to say, maybe on one hand, this is how I'm like the person who died. And then on the other, this is how we're different.
Right.
And, it's okay to be different from that person. It's okay. You remind me just like your dad, but what if their dad died due to suicide? Does that mean I'm going to because I'm like my dad? So again, it's all about words and how things are being used. And, our teens, like our youngest kids, love to make slime and, get into it and get messy. And we'll talk about grief is messy. And so we're doing lots of different things, like that, building Legos, building our grief, and what would a superhero look like? What would your superhero power be? And we know it's not realistic for us to have, lightning speed and things like that. But, depending on what their power is, figuring out like how they can make that happen. And if they had that, how would their grief look different? And then try to figure out like, so if you're worried about your homework, how can we make that happen? Like who needs to do that homework? What do you have control over and what don't you have control over? So we talk a lot about what the child can do themselves and then how they can best impact, their brother or sister or, how they can help their parent or guardian too.
Sure. Yeah. And it's remarkably hard to create your own sense of self and your identity anyway. And then to have these other pieces that you're also sort of factoring in, as a young person, a middle schooler, high schooler, but again, how important that peer group is to help support. And yeah, you've hit it right when they can facilitate conversation and really support each other so naturally. So, the museum certainly was founded on this understanding that fundamentally children need play. They need play to, discover about the world, to learn about their skills, their limits, all of that. But it's just such a fundamental piece of how kids explore and discover about themselves and about the world. We really champion this idea of free play as opportunities for kids to explore their own interests, be the leader of the play, really direct it to start, to stop when they are ready, to move on to something else, to deepen the play with every sort of nugget of new information they figure out or skill that they master. Play is really that like fundamental building block for them. I think about how when families, I mean, we sort of have a luxury, right, at the museum when we see families, you know, they've opted into coming to the museum, and they've left the folding at home and the many things that they're responsible for at home. But you know, when families are really focused on children during play, gosh, there's like this explosion of language and confidence and connection, and that's just you know, just a great feeling for everybody. And then often, you know, in that sort of connection is they're relaxed, and you're seeing and hearing things that kids are puzzling and wondering and figuring out, and you know, it's a chance for them to ask a question because they really have your attention. And you know, I think about how much, you know, the play really, if an adult could be present during that play and make the connections like you talked about, but also just be available, just be ready to hear for those moments when you're in sync, you know, that's really pretty tremendous. Yeah, and you know, we know that play fosters attachment with adults. It really is a chance to sort of reconnect, and we know we can't always be in sync, but a chance to play. And I'm reminded of a parent who says, the child never wants to play with me, but he'll play hide and seek for hours. Well,
play hide and seek with them.
you know, figure out how to really be a co-player when you can. You know, it's understandable. But in that moment of co-play, you really get to see some great things. And the other thing that you brought up is this idea of pretend play. So the museum is just full of loose parts, lots of things that you can build with and you can explore, but also is the opportunity to put on a smock and pretend you're from the colonial period or whatever the costume sort of affords. But we know that pretend play and acting is really a chance to figure out life, you know. So you put on mom's high heel shoes and you get to try different roles on and make sense of what's going on around you. And you also sometimes see kids who are being a little impatient or their voices are loud, and you realize that's a reflection of perhaps something they're seeing in adults. So you know, I see how powerful play must be for your kids. Yeah.
Again, for anybody. And I always say that adults, your job, you know, your work, like your job is to work. For kids, their job is to play. And their play could be anything. And like you just said, encourage it, let them dictate it. If you want to keep it a little bit, you know, kind of fenced in, then do that. So if you're going to finger paint with a kid, that's like, you're allowing them to express themselves with big movements.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have them, you know, play a little bit more quietly or a little bit, you know, more cleanly. Have them color a mandala, have them color a coloring book. Because then, again, they don't have to stay in the lines, but at least it's kind of contained to, you know, a wet mess and a dry mess.
Yes.
You know, things like that.
Yeah. Well, so thinking about strategies for working with grief at home, and currently we're all really at home. You know, what are some things to think about that are important? I mean, we've talked a lot about play, but what are possibly some other strategies for working with grief at home?
So I think one of the biggest things that comes up for the adults is that they may say, I don't want to make my child sad. And on the flip side, the child will say, well, I want to find out more about my dad, but I don't want to upset my mom. So if it's on your mind as the child or as the adult and you want to know, then ask. Because again, by talking about the person who died, it's validating that they lived, and it's validating that their life had meaning and that you're thinking of them. So we'll create even just like a question box at FriendsWe, because maybe there's times, again, obviously if you're coming and going and it's a little bit more hectic, but if you're thinking about like, I don't know my dad's favorite color, write it down on a piece of paper, throw it in a little tissue box, question box, and then, when your adult is ready to be like, oh, you wrote some things down, like let's have a look at this. And by talking about the person who has died, it allows them to be more present. Because if you're biting your tongue to be like, I don't really want to, if I say this, then I know I'm going to upset Kristin, and then you're just more on edge about it. Like, release it, talk about it. So I know kids are spending a lot more time on their computers, or parents are spending, maybe less time with their kids in the way that they want to do. But dedicate some time to leave your baggage, leave things, that can get tended to later. But check in with your child about their day. Like, what'd you learn today at school? You were able to play outside in the street. Did you do any chalk drawings? Or, you know what, let's go out and do one because we know it's going to rain tonight. And I'm really thinking of your dad, and it's his birthday tonight. So maybe we do a message on the tar that you want to, send to your dad, and it's going to get washed away, and that message will get to him. So it's like doing things with intention, and, reading a bedtime story, or encouraging the child, if, as they're getting older and they want to read to you, empowering the child to do things, because then they feel more accomplished that, hey, like, I can do this. And, just speaking the moments that come. And if it's in your head, it's probably in their child's head.
Yeah. So make time to talk and to play. And I know it's tough with some kids. What'd you do today? Nothing. Well, maybe you start off sort of reconnecting, and then that happens. And certainly
and challenge them to
Yeah.
say, how did you have a whole 8 hours of nothing? That's not even possible. Something had to have happened.
Yeah.
If it's a little humorous and joking with them, they'll come around.
Yeah. But the noticing and the connecting is wonderful. Well, I wondered if folks, if there's anybody who maybe has a question or an answer or something to share, please use the Q&A function, the question and answer function. But while we're maybe people are thinking about questions, Ryan, would you share with folks how to find you, how to find more resources perhaps, and to find FriendsWe?
Sure. So we are at friendswe.org. I know a sheet will go around with our other information, but our phone number is 401-921-0980. And like we said in the beginning, where we're not counseling, we are typically not the first stop for your grief. However, you may hear of us soon after the death has happened. Most of the time, families may call us, several weeks, several months. And I want to also let people know that it's okay to come, even years after the death. If it's important enough to be calling to say something's not quite right, or I've heard of you and I've never picked up the phone, but it's been 2 years, and can I still have my child involved? The answer is yes. So again, we're working with kids ages 3 to 18, so preschool age through the end of high school, typically running throughout the school year, so September through June, on either a Monday Tuesday or a Wednesday night. So intakes happen in person, or right now, everything is via Zoom. But, you know, an intake happens, you get familiar with me, I show you around the building, do some things to get to know you and your kids, and then we'll, you know, place you on whatever night is best. And then we offer dinner from 6:30 to 7 till 8:10 is group. And, you know, our kids love being a part of FriendsWe, even though they never wanted to have to be a part of this club.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. We do have two questions, sort of. So we have Gabrielle shares, I'm a registered play therapist and have referred clients to FriendsWe, and it's an interesting program and would love to volunteer when schedule allows, but gets busy. But thank you, Gabrielle. Folks can find information about volunteering at the website?
Yes.
Yes.
We had to unfortunately cancel a volunteer session that was going to be held in person, but we are looking to see if we can do a training over Zoom, at least maybe to get started, and then later on, once we can, you know, meet in person. We typically hold our volunteer trainings a couple times a year.
Yeah. Terrific. And Tracy asks if this Zoom will be available to share with others. Tracy's a teacher and would like to be able to share this with a parent. And yes, Tracy, this will be up on our YouTube channel. The Providence Children's Museum has a YouTube site. Clearly, I'm so contemporary. I know exactly what I'm talking about. But so look for Providence Children's Museum's YouTube channel, and you'd be able to find us there and find this there.
So, Kristin, I can take this other question came in. Sure. Just from Michelle about how to handle the grief children are feeling with the sudden quarantine, the isolation, school at home. So what we are feeling right now, what you are feeling right now, and your kids are feeling right now is grief. Regardless if a death has happened, it feels like many things have died in sorts, right? You can't go to restaurants, you can't go out, you're working from home, your kids are at home. So verbalize it and acknowledge it, but then, you know, there's a lot of other people that will say, oh, I'm stuck at home. Well, rephrase it to say, well, you're safe at home. You know, you're safe at home, and we're hopefully being able to do other things in our homes that maybe you've never done before or had the time to do. So again, try to take advantage of this, you know, quarantined time that you do have. But yes, acknowledge, like, yes, you miss your friends. So let's think creatively how we can connect with your friends. I mean, you could still do a little drive-by. You could still do a chalkboard note on, you know, outside. You can pick up a pen and send something in the mail to be like, hey, I was thinking of you and I really miss you. You know, you can engage in any of these video calls and, you know, doing different projects at home. There's a lot of resources as well on childrengrieve.org. So it's the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And they have all sorts of free resources that you can do your COVID-19 time capsule. You know, there are some that may not want to relive what has happened, but you can look back to be like, these are all the things I learned about myself. And I was able to make a really cool corner in my room. And I've never been able to make a fort in my living room before, but Mom let us do it last night. So just trying to think a little bit more, you know, kind of DIY, and, you know, have your kids help you with dinner. Maybe they weren't able to help you before, you know, teach them different things.
Yeah. 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 And I know many folks on this Zoom meet, you know, this webinar are educators, and just how important your role is and the connectivity that you provide for the kids to their their classmates and the place that they so miss. You are all, doing wonderful, wonderful, absolutely essential work. And I know that many of the educators are grieving because they miss their kids and they're worried about their kids. And so,
Right.
yeah. And we're very thankful for your time, and hopefully the conversation doesn't stop. If you need Ryan or the museum, even though our spaces might be closed, we are still hard at work and wanting to support the communities that we support. So, well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you to all of our participants. And